Hi, I'm Professor Lee Jensen, and today we're going to be talking about deliverable number 4, user interface testing using JWT Pizza. If you look at the instructions for this deliverable, you'll see that we introduced Playwright into our equation here. And you should have already gone through all the instructions to teach you how to use Playwright and have a pretty good feel for what functionality that actually provides. But we're going to show you what that actually looks like within the JWT Pizza front end UI. So that's going to be done in your development environment. You're going to create all those tests there, and then you're going to use a GitHub action to actually execute that in your continuous integration script that you created before. We're just augmenting it now to add testing to it. That's still going to deploy to pages, assuming that your coverage testing actually meets the required minimum and that all your tests run correctly. So the instruction talks about, first of all, setting up everything like was given in the earlier instructions. So you're going to install Playwright, configure it, write some simple tests. But in order to help you get started, we're going to walk through that instruction for you now at this time. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that you go ahead and install Playwright to your development environment. So I'm going to toggle over here to my console window, and I'm already in my JWT Pizza clone of my fork of the repository, and I'm just going to install Playwright. This is going to step you through some questions. We're going to go ahead and use TypeScript because that's what it actually uses in the front end. We're going to put our tests in the test directory, and we don't want it to write our GitHub Actions workflow for us. We're going to do that ourselves, so we're going to keep that false. And we're not going to have it install the Playwright browsers at this time. We'll do that manually here in a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and say false. We're doing that because we don't want all of them installed. We just want Chromium, basically, so we can save room on our hard drive, and we're not going to use those at this point. So there we go. We should be all done, and you can see that we've got some new stuff in here. If I do a git status, you'll see that I've got some new files because I've changed my package because I've installed some other stuff, and I've also created 2 new directories. So if I toggle over to my code by opening up Visual Studio Code, I can see that I've got those files in here. And I can go see exactly what changed in here by going to my source control and look in the package. You can see that Playwright test got installed. That's great. So we're up and running at that point with Playwright installed, and we're ready now to start writing tests. So let's go back and see what the instruction actually says to do. And it's saying that we want to update our scripts, our JSON package, our Node.js package, JSON file, so that it can execute Playwright tests. So we're just going to grab this line right here, head back over to our source code, open up our package JSON file, and insert into our scripts along with our dev run, our build, and our preview. We're going to put in the ability to actually execute a test. And at this point, we're good to go. Actually, we should be able to go out to our command line and do npm run test. And it should invoke Playwright and run the default test that it actually has built within the system. You can see that that worked. We got 2 tests passed, and everything's cool there. So Playwright's in, Playwright's running. What tests is it actually executing? It's executing these tests found in this simple script, which all this does is just go out to playwright.dev and make sure that I can actually see that the page is there. So I don't really love that test. I definitely don't want to look at the example test, so I'm going to delete that out of my code to make sure I'm not checking that in. And I'm going to go back over and check out what the instructions tell us to do next. And it's telling us that we want to clean up the Playwright configuration. There's a whole ton of stuff that it actually puts in there that we don't really want to include. And you should look at that and understand exactly what it's all doing so that you can appreciate the cleanup version that we're actually giving here. So I'm going to copy that cleanup version, toggle back over to the code, go look at our Playwright configuration.ts file, our file here. I'm going to overwrite that with the one that they actually gave me. So that's good. I've got now a cleaned up version. All this does is just looks for the local host running with our Vite debugger. And we're going to use Chromium as our development environment. And we're going to run our web server on localhost with 5173. So that's, the Vite debugger putting that up there, and we're going to use that there. So the other thing that we need to do at this point is actually install the Chromium debugger. So I'm going to go ahead and do that by hitting Command-Shift-P, just bring up the Visual Studio Code, and select the Install Playwright browsers. And you can see here that it's got all 3 of them specified. I just want the Chromium one, so I'm going to go ahead and uninstall those and then push OK. That's going to execute the installation. If you haven't installed it before, it's going to take a little bit longer. I already had Chromium installed, so it just checked to make sure it's there, and it was almost instantaneous. Head on back to the instruction, And you can see that we next want to install the ability to do our coverage testing. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that, head back over to my console window and install the components for doing coverage testing. This is two things basically. First, there's NYC, which is the actual instrumentation of your code, so it can track which lines have been hit. And then Istanbul is the front end to that, so it actually like outputs a report based upon the instrumentation that NYC put in there. So those two tools together work with the Playwright test coverage to actually visualize your tests whenever the Playwright tests run. So I'm going to install those there. Once those are done, I'm going to have a few more changes that are made to my project. But the important thing we need to do is actually tell Vite how to use that stuff. So let's head back over here and configure both NYC and Vite to use that coverage. So the NYC resource file that we're going to put in here basically says in order for the test to pass, I have to have so many branches, so much percentage of branches covered, lines covered, and functions and statements covered. And what we're shooting for with this deliverable is to get about 80% on all of these. So once you have 80%, then you've done your UI testing correctly, and we're good to go. So you specify that in the NYC.rc JSON file. So we need to go create that now. So I'm going to toggle over my code. Right here in the root of my project, I can create a new file called that. And then I'm going to toggle back over here and copy that contents there and put that in there. And then I'm going to tell Vite how to execute Istanbul to actually read the coverage information that we want. And this is telling that we want to cover everything that's in source, and we want to exclude anything that's within the node modules. So I'm going to go over to my Vite config file and create that right in here. And new, create that file, and put those contents in here. There you go. Okay, so the last thing I do is I already added to my scripts the ability to run tests, but now I want to be able to run coverage in addition to that. So I need a new command added to my package.json scripts. Head back over here, and underneath the one that just runs the test basically, I'm going to put in one that also does coverage testing. And it does that by executing NYC, and then that just turns around and runs the Playwright test, which is here. So it's a wrapper around the Playwright test to actually build the report summary and instrument the code. So now I can go ahead and go out to my console again. We've still got our sample test in there, and I'm going to run the same thing again, but in this time I'm going to run it with coverage. So that should be pretty quick. It'll execute those two sample tests that Playwright gives us, and you'll see that I'm not getting any lines covered. And that might be surprising at first, but considering that it's the can test from Playwright, and all it's doing is going out to check to make sure that Playwright, the website, can load and your code isn't ever actually ran. So now we want to get rid of the Playwright sample test and write our first test, which should actually invoke our code and show us what our coverage is. So heading back to the instruction, we're going to go over into here and create our first test, which is just going to load the home page for our JWT Pizza client. So I'm going to come here into our test, and I'm going to get rid of this test file, and I'm going to create a new test file in here. We're going to call that the JWT spec.js file. I think that's the name that we were supposed to give it. Yep, no, sorry, pizza spec.js. Better follow the instructions. You never know what you're going to get if you don't. So I'm going to go ahead and rename that to pizza spec.js. Paste that in there. Spec is just kind of the name that a lot of testing frameworks use to say it's a specification of how the thing should work. You can use the word test too there. It's all how Playwright is configured to what files to look for. So go ahead and use spec and you'll be fine. So this one here is just going to import the coverage versions of the testing framework. My test is just called, can I load the home page? I'm going to / which is the home page that we've configured Vite Playwright to run under. And I'm going to just check to make sure that my title is actually JWT Pizza. So now if I toggle back over to my console window and run that coverage test again, I should see something much more interesting in my coverage result. And there you go, I'm actually hitting my code. In fact, just by hitting the home page, I actually got almost 20% coverage in there, which shows you kind of how silly coverage numbers are. Like I've asserted nothing is actually working right other than the title is there, and I can get 20% coverage. What you'll also find though is it's actually a little tricky to get 80% coverage, but you'll have lots of fun doing it. And hopefully you'll put some interesting assertions in there that you're actually getting the content that you're in, not just that you're hitting the lines, but you're getting back the values that you expect in there. Okay, so we're up and running. We got 20% coverage. We've got our first test written there. Let's go see what the instructions say to do next. So in order to really write a good test, you could go and write all of those Playwright commands by hand. And you know, if you're really careful about it, you could do that easily. And the more familiar you get with it, the easier you'll be able to do that. But a better way to do that is, to get started at least, is to use the recorder that's actually built into Playwright and record what's going on there and use that as the start for your test. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the instruction, and we're going to come down here, and this is just a simple template one here for a test, and I'm going to paste that underneath our home test and push the enter button, and then I'm going to come over into the testing window here on the navigation, and I'm going to record at cursor. So I want to put my cursor right in this location here, and we're going to stick in our test here. So now I can drag down the debug window that's recording from, and I want to go ahead and grab that information, and we're just going to push the refresh page here and paste that into, so make sure that we're actually going to that location. And now I'm going to log in, and I'm going to log in using a user that I've created already. So I'm going to do like demo.jwt.com and put in my very secret password for that user, and that logs me in. And then I'm going to go push the order now button, choose a store, and notice it's like highlighting all this stuff because it's like creating all these locators automatically for me, so that I can generate the test that actually uses those locators to interact with the web page. So I picked Provo. I'm going to pick a pizza. Of course, we want pepperoni because that's the best. Go ahead and push the checkout button, and I'm going to pay now. And there you go. I actually got my pizza. I can push the verify button and see that the page is actually valid there. And that's good enough for a simple test, so I'm going to go ahead and stop that test now. We'll get rid of this window here, and you can see that it populated my buy pizza with login with all of that information in order to actually execute it. And once again, I'm not doing any assertions at this point, so the test is totally bogus. I'm going to increase my coverage number, but I'm not actually doing anything of interest here. So let's go ahead and save that. I'm going to head back over to my console window, run my coverage test again, and we should see a bump here because we're doing a lot more. So we went from whatever it was, 21 to 52%. So I'm like halfway to 100% here, and I haven't actually validated that anything is working. I'm just hitting lines of code. So that's great though. I mean, we're on our way. The next step that the instruction is going to tell you to do is that you want to make it so that you can mock out the backend service. So right now I'm actually calling the pizza factory service, not even my own service. So if I want to call my own service, then I can go ahead and change the development environment of files to point to my own service. That means I'm always going to have that service running whenever I run my front end test. That's not such a great way to be. Plus, it also assumes that like the data is there, like that user that I just referenced there when I ran my test is already in my system. What you really want to do is you want to mock out that backend. So we're going to stop doing an integration test at this point and actually do a mock test of it. And to do your mocking, you need to know exactly what the requests are that are to be done from the server. And I'm not going to show you how to do that. I'm just going to reference you back here to the instruction where it talks about recording the endpoint request. So if you change over from actually showing the browser to showing the trace viewer, and you execute, walk around in there, you can actually see the requests that are being made as this test right here actually executes. And with that done, you can then go down and look at the network information to see what requests were done, what responses were done, and you're going to basically end up with a table that kind of looks like this. So you know that there was a GET request, the endpoint was this, there was no request body, and that it returned this kind of a response to that. And with that, you can go ahead and create mocks. And the mocks all look like this. You should already know this from the instruction that was given before on building mocks using Playwright. But basically you're saying whenever this page is routed to ** API auth, that I'm going to expect that there is a put request and that the request has this login information. So here now, instead of actually having a username JWT Pizza or JWT.com in the database, it will just pretend like it's there and return a response that user's name is actually Kai Chen. So now it's not calling the server anymore. We've removed the integration portion of our test and just made it a simple unit test. And you go through all of the endpoints that you want to include in your test. So for that simple thing where I was logging in and buying a pizza, I'm going to end up with something that looks like this here. And I've already written that one for you to kind of get you started, give you an example of what to do. And so I'm just going to copy that right now and go paste that over into my code. So I'm going to replace this test right here, which was the recorded version, which was what I used to actually create this test here. That does a whole bunch of other stuff in here. So it's doing a login with purchase. I've got my different routes for logging in, ordering a pizza, franchising, and logging in, and then also the request to actually go and hit those things, to interact with all of the UI elements that are in there, and check to make sure that those values are actually there. So in the end, I'm making sure that like I can see the actual balance that's returned there. So with that done, I'm going to go ahead and save that. We're going to go back out and execute our coverage again, and let's see what we get. So before we were 52%, you can see we actually went down 1%, so we're down to 51%. And I'm actually happy about that because my test is actually testing things to make sure they're there instead of just, executing a whole bunch of clicks on the page, and that's running lines of code. So I've got some pretty valid code there, and I've also given you a pretty good start to actually writing your test. So your goal is to go ahead and put 30% more lines on there. You're going to need, more than that. You're going to need 32% more functions covered. Branches is already there, and your statements are already there. So between your functions and your lines, you should be able to get up to 80%, and then you've actually reached your desired thresholds. So if we toggle back to the instruction now, past that section, the last thing we need to do is actually deploy our test that we've done here with our CI pipeline. So we're going to add a couple things to it. First of all, we're actually going to run our tests, and then we're going to also make sure that our coverage is what we expect, and we're going to update the coverage badge that shows up on the README file to display what our coverage actually is. So if I grab these here and toggle back over to my source code and go and visit our CI pipeline, and right after we've built, but before we upload our artifact, I'm going to insert this in here. And pop that right there. So that's going to run the test. And then this one right here is going to update the coverage. So blast that one in there. Make sure it's lined in because YAML, white space matters. And we're good to go. Make sure you study those. I've walked you through the kind of coverage things before when you did that with the service code. It's similar kind of stuff here, but make sure you understand what that's all doing. So now I think we're ready to actually run our CI pipeline, and if everything works there. So this thing is going to check because we set up our thresholds are all 80%, and we're not getting that yet. So if I actually check this in and ran it right now, it would stop on the test run because it'd say you haven't met your limit. So I'm just going to tweak this right now just so I can see a positive result and put everything down to 10% instead of 80%. Other than that, I think I'm ready. So let's go ahead and do our deployment now. So we added deliverable number 4, UI testing and coverage. Commit that in there and push those changes up. Now I should be able to toggle back over to my GitHub account, which is represented by this BYU CS student here. Navigate into my JWT Pizza front-end code repository and go to my actions, and there you go. We can see that it's actually running right now. And we can open up the build steps, and it's ran our build already, and it's running our tests. This is going to take a little bit longer than we had before because we're actually running Chromium and doing a whole bunch of front-end interactions there. But that's all happening. You can see, we're installing Chromium right there with those little steps. And as soon as that's done, it's going to execute that coverage test right there. And good. We saw our coverage number. What did we get? 51%. That's the same thing we're getting locally. So we're happy there. We're updating the coverage badge, and that all worked right. So our build is actually green, and now we're moving on to the deployment step. And that should take a couple seconds just to update GitHub pages. But while that's going, I should be able to actually go over to my code and look at my README file here. And if I refresh that page, then you can go ahead and see that it's giving you the coverage amount that we expect, 51.26%. All right, we're all set. Let's go look at our instructions here really quickly. We can see that we created our Playwright test. We're getting at least 51% coverage, you're going to get 80%. We've created our GitHub Actions workflow and make sure that it executes a test. We've added the configuration necessary to fail. That should just come by making sure you set the NYRC file correctly. And also we've added reporting to the coverage by creating a badge and a README file. Check, check, check. Awesome. That's going to give us 100%. Go ahead and submit that and you're good to go. Hope you enjoyed this and good luck.